Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist and exam success coach, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast. And today I'm answering your questions about how to study effectively. Today's recording is a bit of a first for me in front of a live audience, albeit a virtual audience, joining me over Zoom. So we may have a bit of audience interaction as we go. Whether you're joining me live or tuning in later, I'm so glad you are able to join today and looking forward to sharing some ideas with you. There are a range of questions that I've got on my list that were pre-submitted today, covering a whole range of different areas of study. So we've got maths, we've got physics, we've got languages, we've got politics, we've got accounting, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things: how to improve when you're not getting the results you want, how to build focus, how to prioritize limited study time, how to organize your study with multiple topics, and more. So hopefully there'll be a little bit some useful ideas here for everybody. I've got 10 main kind of pre-submitted questions, so I'll go through them in number order. So our first question number one, comes from Adam in the States, who asks, I am struggling in my Calculus 2 class and am needing to retake it. I was wondering if you have any mathematics studying advice for this course or maths in general. Also, any tips for physics, because I'm studying that too. So great question, Adam. Thank you. It's actually been on my mind to do an episode specifically for maths and other kind of quantitative numerical type subjects like physics, other sciences, even to an extent kind of economics, business studies, any subject where you've kind of got quantitative material, problems to solve, maths style content. For today, I'd say a couple of things. So most importantly, I think, is this idea that struggling with something that's hard and wrestling with it is so often part of the process. And there was an interview that I did with Joachim Cassel all the way back in episode 4, which really good episode for me, kind of getting my head in this particular space. So that could be a good one. Episode 4 with Joachim Cassel, that could be a good one to have a listen to for some inspiration on that kind of mindset, to just wrestle with it and figure it out. With the kind of the mindset piece in mind, some of the concrete practical things you might do to make progress when you're stuck. You could study the worked examples. So try and complete the exact worked example, perhaps, with the book closed. That's forcing you to do retrieval practice on the methodology so that you're consolidating it and internalizing it. Plus, you have the safety net of being able to go back to the worked example at any point if you get stuck. Another idea could be to use an AI like ChatGPT to help you to learn. So crucially, we're not just copying out our answers from ChatGPT, but because that won't help us to learn. But if you don't understand a particular step, you could sort of ask the AI to explain why that step goes to that step, for example, and then keep asking why questions until you really feel like you've got to the bottom of how you go about solving a particular type of problem. And then you might consider flipping the script and asking the AI to quiz you on your understanding of how to solve that kind of problem to consolidate your understanding. That could be a really nice way to use the AI tools we've got at our fingertips today. A third idea would be to, as Brian Tracy calls it, Swiss cheese it. So Swiss cheese, that cheese, we've got big holes in it. So the idea being to kind of not necessarily work in logical order, but punch holes in kind of representing your understanding. Spot the parts you do understand. Those are your holes. Punch a hole where you can of understanding and clarity, and then build out from those holes that you've punched in it. Sometimes it can be helpful in doing this to literally get out a set of flashcards and memorize some of the building blocks for the content or the problem type that you're learning. Even if a given component kind of makes sense on its own, you kind of read why that bit goes to that bit, or there's an equation or something. Even if a kind of component of the overall problem, you kind of make sense of it. Like, you understand it when you read it. Just the act of memorizing it so you can recall it really, really fluently can really help when you're starting to tackle bits you don't understand. So it's like if you've got a kind of a big choppy sea of lots and lots of things that you kind of vaguely know, it's quite hard to make sense of things you really don't know that are kind of dotted throughout this choppy, messy sea of things you don't really, you kind of vaguely know it, but not really fluently. Whereas if we have a nice calm lake of lots and lots of things, lots of ideas, lots of bits of the material that you kind of know cold, you can recall them really fluently, and then it makes it much easier to focus in on those remaining islands of kind of things you don't understand yet, and kind of break them down and master them. I'd also suggest, so we've kind of talked about how to get your head around material when it doesn't make sense at first. I'd also generally say for any kind of problem practice in maths or physics or similar subjects where you've got problems to practice, interleaving is a really nice strategy to know about. We talked about interleaving in episodes 156 and 166. The author of this question is with us live today and mentions, which is lovely to see, that using the book for retrieval practice is a very helpful idea. How did I not think of that? Well, I'm glad to be helpful. That's really good. Well, listen, we're wishing you every success. Really good question. Thank you so much for submitting. Someone else suggests following up with the lecture, also helpful for building understanding. Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really important idea. I guess in my kind of idea about using the AI, I'm sort of assuming that maybe you don't have easy access to a teacher or a tutor or a lecturer. If you do and you are able to go and ask them, then that's obviously a really, really good thing to do as well. Fantastic. So question number 2. This is kind of a few questions all in one. There were a few questions which were submitted, which were in essentially some kind of variant of kind of like, I'm not getting the results I want. I'm falling behind. How do I improve? Here's one example of that question, which came from Caroline, a listener, Caroline in Namibia. She says, I was a good performing student in high school, but ever since I came to university, I have drastically downgraded. How do I get back on track again? Well, many, many listeners find themselves in this situation at some time or other. My advice here couldn't possibly be a specific tip or idea because there are so many different things that could be at play. Rather, what I'm going to offer you is more of a process, more of a way to work through this kind of challenge, rather than a specific practical idea. So everyone who's here with me today for the live recording, we started our call just a little bit earlier before we kind of dig into the podcast section of it. And we did an exercise together called the Wheel of Studying, where we kind of assess ourselves on different areas of our study strategy and trying to get a bit more clarity on our strengths and weaknesses, and kind of get a bit more insight onto which bits we might want to work on so that we can make more progress. For those of you listening to this as a podcast later, if you yourself want to take a look at the Wheel of Studying exercise, I will put a link to where you can find it in the episode description. I have that as part of a little mini course I call the Ace Your Exams Planning Party. There's a little workbook and there's a kind of a 40-minute workshop recording that goes along with it. I give it away super inexpensively. It's only about $9. But if you really can't run to $9 because of your financial situation, just shoot me an email and I will give you access to that completely free, as I have done for everybody here on the live recording with me today, as my little Christmas gift to you all. So when you go through the Wheel of Studying, you will start to understand your strengths and weaknesses as a scholar. You'll be able to tease apart which areas you need to focus on improving. So are you struggling because you're not putting in the work due to lack of motivation or a bad study routine? Are you putting in the work, but the material is just not making sense? Or are you making sense of the material at the time, but then you forget it all and you can't remember it in the exam? These are all very different challenges and therefore will have very different solutions. Often there are kind of multiple things that come together. So when a student is in that situation where they're saying, look, I'm falling behind, things aren't going well, how do I get back on top? Often there is both a kind of a practical element and a mindset element. If we're falling behind, almost inevitably, we're going to start to feel demotivated and discouraged before too long. In that case, where we are starting to feel a bit demotivated, we might, want to do some work on motivation. But unless we tackle that root cause and work on your toolkit to study and engage with the course material successfully, whether that's memorizing it better, whether that's getting your head around tricky stuff you don't understand at first, then, we could have the best motivational strategies in the world, but they won't really help because we haven't got to the root cause that was causing the lack of motivation, because you're getting frustrated in the progress you're making in your course. So before we can change something, we need to ask the right question. What specifically do we need to improve about your study strategy to help you catch up and get back on top? Once we've identified what needs to change, then we can make some real progress. Perhaps you have some solutions in mind already that you could use once you've identified your challenge, or perhaps that can prompt a search for answers. And for example, the episodes of this very podcast could be a good place to start searching for answers on a particular question about your study strategy. Okay. My third question is again a bit of a compilation of questions. So a few people were saying, "Well, okay, I've got a not very good instructor or teacher, and for a particular course or subject, and like, what do I do about that?" So one listener, for example, asked, "What steps can I take if the teaching methods at my school are not effective and I am struggling to keep up?" Another said, "How do I study physics?" It's physics again, with a bad teacher and unexpected exams. I only have 2 days until my midterm and feel unprepared for the 4 units we will be quizzed on. So we'll come back to that bit about last minute study in our next question, actually. But the thing about how to deal with a bad teacher, I mean, I should firstly just say I feel a bit awkward kind of using the phrase bad teacher on the podcast, because I do so much work with wonderful teachers in my day work as in my day-to-day work as an exam study expert, and the work I do in schools, and I have a huge amount of respect for the teaching profession and the wonderful job that so many excellent teachers do. I mean, however, as in any profession, there's going to be occasional individuals who are less effective. And, any teachers listening, I'm sure you can think of colleagues you've come across over the years who, with the best will in the world, might not be quite up to the standard of most of your other peers as teachers. So what to do when you're a student faced with a teacher that's not quite giving you what you feel you need? Well, I say the biggest thing is quite a good news story in many ways. I don't think there has ever been a better time in history to have a bad teacher. So when I was at school, I had an amazing chemistry teacher, really inspirational. But one of my friends in a different class found they really struggled with their chemistry teacher. This particular friend ended up actually smashing her year-end exam in chemistry. And I remember chatting to her about it, and she just said, look, I mean, I basically studied it all myself. It was a lot of extra work. And she came top in the year. There has never been a better time to be trying to teach yourself. There are just so many resources freely available on the internet. You have vastly more support available than back in my day when my classmate was trying to just do everything off the textbook. There are content creators on YouTube and other platforms who can effectively serve as your virtual teacher for just about any subject under the sun. Find someone you like who has a good reputation, and feel free to use their stuff to support and complement as you need it. As we've talked about already today, you can also turn to AI for explanations or clarifications when things don't quite make sense at first. And finally, you could also think about looking at online forums like Reddit or Facebook, where you can find groups of peers that are studying similar courses or the same course. That's another source of help and support, either on particularly well-regarded resources, or if you've got a particular question, again, you can ask your peers in that kind of forum, and that can be helpful. So a good number of the clients I work with in my sort of private coaching work are effectively self-studying. They don't have a teacher at all. It's all on them from scratch, particularly some of my older clients, professionals studying for kind of professional certifications in medicine or finance. And they have to use strategies like the ones we've just been mentioning because there's no one else there to do their teaching for them. But when you do have a teacher who you feel is not quite helping, then, as with my friend in her chemistry class, sure, you may have a little extra work to do, but you absolutely have a route open to you, and that route has never been better resourced and never more open to you as it is today. It is doable if you're committed to it. Question number 4. Let's talk about how to study at the last minute. So that came up in the previous question. So 2 things. Firstly, stick to what works. If you've got a limited amount of time left on the clock before an exam, whether that's 2 days, 2 months, it can be tempting to deviate from effective study strategy when you're under stress, when you're under time pressure. Try and resist that temptation. Don't fall back on less effective things just because it's the last minute. Stick with what works. Stick with what you know best. What is going to work best for you. So that's kind of one dimension, stick with the effective stuff, even at the last minute. The other dimension is something a little bit broader. And I'm going to broaden out this question to be kind of about how to prioritize your learning when the amount you have to cover simply doesn't fit into the time available, whether that's 2 days left or 2 months left. Many of the students I talk to day to day are faced with a situation where the kind of the scope of what they need to learn with the best will in the world just does not fit into the time available. The maths just doesn't work about how much time they've got and how much time they need to get through the material. So we need to find solutions to that. We need to find a way to prioritize. How do we do that? Well, above all, don't be tempted to whiz through the material superficially without really getting any benefit from looking at it. So just the sense that you've covered a lot of ground just because you've read through all your books. I'd say it's always better to look at less material, but make sure that you're making meaningful progress on it. So, for example, it's better to look at one topic and really kind of get the question on it right when the exam comes, rather than sort of whiz through 10 topics and not actually be able to answer questions on even one of the 10 topics, if that makes sense. It's always better to do it more thoroughly so that you actually can answer the question on it in the exam. This is a hard thing to internalize for many people, and something that I often spend quite a bit of time on when I'm working one-on-one with coaching clients. But once you have kind of accepted that point that you might not be able to get through everything and we need to prioritize, then the question becomes what to prioritize with your limited time. So this may sound obvious, but pick the areas of your course to prioritize where spending the time will bring you the highest return in terms of marks scored in the exam. So, a couple of examples. You probably won't choose topics that you're quite close to mastering, because you'll often be in a diminishing marginal returns situation with those topics. So, to go from kind of 90% to 95% or 95 to 97% of mastery on a particular topic is going to take more and more time and more time invested to gain fewer and fewer incremental marks. So that is not going to be a good return on your investment of study time. You might also choose to cut your losses on the toughest, least familiar topics, because that is where you'd need to sink huge amounts of time before you can get to the point where you really start to be able to answer questions on the material. Instead, your dream topic to prioritize is probably one where you've got at least some familiarity, you've got some of the building blocks in place already, and then by doing a little bit more work on it, you can very quickly get to the point where you go from being able to answer relatively few questions to being able to answer kind of most of the questions that would come up on that topic. So in relatively little time, you might be able to zoom up from like 25% to 75% of that material that you'd be able to answer on in the exam. It's a really nice comment which someone shared just now on all of this, which is that they have anxiety and therefore end up crashing out at the last minute if they leave studying to the day before. The commenter writes, I can get sick the night before if I leave it to the last minute. And I think that's a really, really good point. So try to avoid putting things off to the last minute, trying to avoid leaving it all to the last minute. I sometimes talk about tapering your studying time. So you gradually aim to reduce the amount of time you're studying, particularly on that final day, final couple of days. Don't aim to do a really big long day the day before a big exam, in exactly the same way that if you had a big marathon to run competitively, you probably wouldn't run a marathon as your training session the day before, because your legs will be exhausted in the marathon the day after. You train a little bit more gently, a bit more lightly, conserve your energies for the big day. Let me move into a slightly more quick fire round. So for our next set of 5 questions or so, I will kind of give you some slightly more quick fire answers. So the 5th question I had on my list today, best way to review humanities subjects, politics in particular, for entering a new semester. The first idea from me would be to ask your instructors what they would suggest. So maybe there's some reading you could do, you could get ahead on, but your instructors for that course will be able to advise best. The second idea I'd share is to do some blank page retrieval. So blank piece of paper, scribble out what you can remember, then compare against your source text to consolidate your understanding of material that you've seen before, which you think is going to be built on in the new semester ahead. So you're consolidating and kind of pre-learning some of the key ideas that you're going to be building on in the next semester ahead. Okay. Question number 6. How can I find motivation to learn a second language when it's required by my school, but I struggle to enjoy or connect with it? Lovely question. My answer would be, you will enjoy it more as you get better at it. I think the best way to build that enjoyment and connection with it is just to keep practicing, start to get better at it, start to get good at it. Very easy to start to flow from getting better at it into, actually I enjoy it a bit more now. So it might be a little bit harder, perhaps, than your first language, which it sounds like you're enjoying a little bit more, implied by your question, but stick with it. Follow-up question 7, related from the same listener. What are some effective strategies to consistently improve my language skills every day? So this obviously kind of flows quite nicely together with the previous question. My answer would be there are loads of ideas out there for things you could do every day to improve your language skills, and what is the best choice for you will depend on your level and your goals. I'll give you a couple of examples. My wife is a linguist, and she's relatively advanced, sort of essentially fluent in two different languages, specifically French and Russian. And she'll do things like listening to foreign language podcasts to keep her French and Russian up to a good standard. For me, I'm more of a beginner. A little bit beyond beginner, maybe, but still far off her standard in French. That's the language I speak best. But for me, I really enjoy doing a little bit of daily Duolingo practice. Very, very popular language learning app, very engaging, and will kind of get you to will kind of level you quite nicely. So it'll give you appropriate practice depending on what your level is. Question number 8. What are the best strategies for staying organised as a student doing lots of subjects? You've got lots of different subjects to learn how to stay organised. So I would say a couple of things. So it's about managing your time and about managing your tasks. So to the listener who asked, I'm actually going to send you complimentary access to a program I've got, the Power Up Productivity Pack, and I'd suggest you check out the lessons in the section on taming your tasks and the lesson on my exact study routine. And I think there's a lot of good content in there that will be very helpful for you. But basically, it boils down to keeping on track with all the different tasks you need to do. Have a single place that collates all the tasks you need to do for all your different subjects. Don't have it scattered in different places. If different teachers or different instructors set it in different ways, make sure you have one source of truth, one place that collects everything, and have a daily ritual to keep that place up to date with what you need to do. And then review that list every day. Decide on your priorities for today. So in the study time you have each day, decide, okay, today specifically, I'm going to work on this, this, and this. These are my top 3 today, or my top 2 today, my top 4 today. Pick what you'll do today off your master list. And have that as a daily ritual. And then for recurring tasks, like if you want to do consistent revision for X subject, or consistent writing or research for Y assignment, where you're going to be working on that over weeks or months, then I'd suggest creating a routine or a ritual around it so it just happens without you having to keep planning it each time. You just plan it once and then it keeps happening. So, for example, if you've got a maths exam coming up and you want to do a bit of regular practice for it, you might say, okay, 30 minutes every weeknight. When I get home, I'm going to do 30 minutes of maths questions. And that's just my daily ritual. Sometimes a daily ritual might be too much, so you might go for a weekly ritual. Say you've got a project that you're working on throughout the year. You might say, okay, 2 hours on a Saturday morning, I'm going to work on my research project. So either having a daily or a weekly ritual to keep ticking over on the more kind of long-term projects. Question number 9. What to do if I have a small attention span and ADHD, and I struggle to focus and stick with tasks for long? So I'm sure many of you out there can relate to this idea, particularly if you also have ADHD. Lots of ideas we could talk about. I think that the first thing I'd suggest for something like this would be the Pomodoro technique, which we talked about back in episode 59. So you might want to go back and check out episode 59 on the Pomodoro technique. You might also want to have a listen to Eric Tiver's episode on ADHD, which was number 114. He had some nice ideas there as well. For the particular listener who asked this question, I'm also going to send you complimentary access to the Power Up Productivity Pack as well, because I think there's lots of ideas in there on focus and energy, which are quite relevant to your question as well. So that's coming your way free of charge. So other comments live from the audience. Someone talking about Duolingo a few moments ago. So someone says, I use Duolingo every day. It really helps, makes learning fun. We were talking about using the syllabus or kind of prioritizing what's most important to learn. So utilizing the syllabus to read what you need to know. So critical for me, gives you an outline of the expectations that your instructor has for you on the exam. Yeah, a really important point. So if you have a published syllabus or specification for your set of exams, definitely making sure you use that to prioritize. And the conversation went on, and I took a few more questions from the audience. We spent probably about another half hour or so chatting and doing questions live. I will link the full unedited raw version of that full Q&A live that I did yesterday at the time of recording this little post note. So I'll link that up in the show notes. I've put the whole raw thing up on the YouTube channel. If you particularly want to hear the full unedited version and the other questions that we were tackling live, but I will cut things here for the purpose of the podcast. I hope there have been some good ideas and inspirations and useful little things that you can take away, and some little nuggets that hopefully, as always, you found that you can use to help you out in your studies. I just wanted to say again, thank you so much to everyone who took part in the event yesterday. It was a huge amount of fun for me. So good to have so much live engagement, so many great questions, comments coming through live, to those that pre-submitted questions, or just those that read the emails, listen to the podcast week in, week out. It's been a really good year, and thank you all so much for being a part of it. If we've been able to help in any way, that has been a huge pleasure. Now, the eagle-eared amongst you, you might have noticed that I said we'd be doing 10 questions today, and we have done 9. I am actually going to save the 10th for a whole episode next week, because it was essentially what I was planning to talk about next week's episode regardless. So the question was, do you recommend studying during the holidays? And if so, how can I make that feel effective without feeling overwhelmed? And as I say, that sets me up perfectly for next week's episode. So that question will be answered as part of next week's episode, when I'll be talking all about studying during the holidays and some of the considerations in terms of balance, practical things that can come into play for different sorts of people in different sorts of circumstances when you're trying to make a bit of progress in your studies over the holidays. So hopefully a few useful practical ideas on that coming up next week. For today, as always, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Something a little bit different. I really enjoyed doing this format, and hopefully we'll bring it back in the future. So do look out for future opportunities to come along live if you missed out this time. For now, just wanted to say thank you all so much, as always, for being part of the show and for tuning in today. And I just want to, as ever, wish you every success in your studies.
Just before you go, did you know you can hire William as your very own coach and mentor to show you the stress-free way to ace your exams by studying smarter, not harder? Find out how at examstudyexpert.com/coaching.